to Your Detroit Now. We got a great show ahead of us. Musa, we're not talking Lions, not talking Tigers, not talking Pistons, not talking Red Wings, no U of M, no MSU. We're talking to Detroit's fifth franchise. Musa, who do we got on the phone today?
We got John Lepic and Paul Batty with us.
Yeah, that's right. CEO and COO of KRONK Gym. Gentlemen, welcome to the show.
Thank you guys for having us.
We're excited. So Musa, the way I wanted to start this, before we get into the intros, before we talk about background, what's the one thing everybody talks about when they have their buddies over for a fight?
It's got to be music.
Music is right. So gentlemen, let's start off there. A little bit of an icebreaker. If you guys had a fight tomorrow, what would be your walkout song? Ooh, I like it. Paul, how about you?
There's some rap songs that aren't appropriate. I'm going to stay safe. I'll say Supersonic Oasis.
Good pick. Musa?
I had the Tiger.
That's a classic pick. I'm going to go Freedom by Pharrell Williams. Gentlemen, let's start off. We got a cool little icebreaker, but let's start off with a background. Paul, let's start with you.
Sure. So again, thanks for having us, Emilio and Musa. Yep. My background, born and bred in Manchester, England. Lived there for 33 years. I got an opportunity to relocate in 2006. Formerly in the IT industry. We moved in March of 2007. So, in fact, 6 days is 19 years we've been in the country. And my career's been all about IT leadership, systems, and customers.
I love it. And John, how about you?
I was born and pretty much raised in Southwest Detroit, not too far from the original KRONK Gym. Our family eventually settled downriver and maintained a close relationship with the community, and got into boxing at a very, very early age. Around 16 is when I first started dabbling in the business side, if you will, and the training side as well, with the late Emmanuel Stewart, our founder. And someone once told me in this business, they said, once you're in it, you're a lifer. So I guess here I am today. I'm still doing life in this game.
So Paul, let's cut back to you real quick. Where did your love for boxing come in?
When I was a young boy, Emilio, my dad was a very big Muhammad Ali fan. Lots of memorabilia and old, what was it called? Not 8 mil, but the film before that. I forget, Cine film, things like that. He had very old reels because he used to collect a lot of old fights as well. But Muhammad Ali was his hero, or when he started following him, it was Cassius Clay because he was watching him at the Rome Olympics. But yeah, I got my love of boxing through him, and it's been not a lifer in the business, but a lifer as a fan for sure since I was a young man.
John, what was your relationship with Emmanuel Stewart?
Wow. Emmanuel was not just to me, but to thousands of kids in Metro Detroit. He was really a mentor. He was a father figure. He was somebody that made a big impact in so many of our lives for various reasons. For me in particular, though, he really opened my eyes up to see a much bigger world that existed. And it was just somebody that I learned probably, for as much as I may have learned about the sport and the business of boxing, being with Emmanuel, I probably learned more about life in general and being able to deal with any punch that life throws at you.
That's amazing. And I guess, what did Emmanuel mean to Detroit?
Oh, that's a long answer. Emmanuel really symbolized what Detroit is about, fighting spirit. Emmanuel, his front door was always open to anyone who wanted to stop by. He treated everybody with kindness and respect. He took his time out for the little guys, not just the big guys. And he really embodied, I think, all that Detroit stands for: resilience, the ability to come back, greatness, a championship spirit. And he was just a very generous man, not just financially, but with his time as well.
This question is for both of you guys. How is KRONK tied to Detroit?
I mean, you can't talk about Detroit without talking about KRONK. In one way, shape, or form, there's stories that intertwine with KRONK's history and this city's history, going back to 1970-71 when Emmanuel took the head trainer position at the KRONK Community Center. Again, and that the word stands out right there, community. KRONK has always been a part of the community. It's been a beacon of hope, I think, for a lot of people at times in their lives when they didn't have hope. And I think that the lessons that were learned inside that gym apply to a lot of people's life paths like myself. But I think it also gave the city something to stand up and cheer for in some of our more darker moments throughout our history. And I think it tying into today, you're seeing a resurgence of our city, and I think it's just absolutely great timing for the city to see a resurgence in KRONK.
I love it. Paul, same question.
Yeah, for me, it's so more on the the lens I've got of Detroit. For 20 years I've lived here, but there's that aspect. But also growing up, we learned a lot about Detroit in school. Manchester and Detroit are very similar, blue collar cities with very good people, straight to the punch, very good at coming back from resilient adversity, hardworking, working class. And Detroit famous for the automobile, the first car driven on Woodward. But as a sports fan and watching Tommy Hearns in those gold trunks and many other fighters over the years, KRONK and Detroit, as I'm wearing this, it's synonymous. And that was another reason when John and I got the opportunity to resurface a brand like this. Of course, it's to fulfill our dreams and our passions, but we also knew this city deserves this back. It's not complete without this. It's just incomplete. It's had its ridiculous levels of history and success over 55 years, and it was just faded away like a pin couldn't drop on it. It was not in a good spot. So we did a fantastic job of doing what was right for the city, which culminates in being right for the community. And now KRONK is a platform, as we've seen now for so many people coming in the gym since we opened just recently back in December. And we sit back as owners looking at it and like, that's what this is about. All these kids now connecting, all these friendships being made. And, in sports clubs, friends are for life. In fact, I'll talk for John a second. He's got friends from when he was at KRONK 30 years ago, still working at the gym or coming in to see him or look around the new place. So to create a platform where kids and adults can be part of something big like this, that's what KRONK means to me.
That's outstanding. And guys, let's go into a little more depth on that. So you guys have kind of two unique sides to the story of buying the IP for KRONK.
Very strangely and weirdly, it was a connection that John and I mutually know. And I was invited to come and watch some boxing at the Youth Development Center, which is white labeled as KRONK in Westland, Michigan. It's called Escott, Emmanuel Stewart's Champions of Tomorrow. And John was with them at that time, working in that establishment. And there was some fight, some gala going on. And I was invited to come down and speak to the team because they might be looking for somebody to acquire or get some interest in the brand. And when I was asked this, I was a little bit quizzical because being a boxing fan and knowing the sport and living in Detroit, 17 years at that point, what am I going to see? KRONK's no KRONK fighters, you don't hear about it anymore, except from a historical perspective. But I turned up, and that was the first time I met John, and I met the Stewart family, and we met some other people, and we just started having conversations, and it took quite a while, and ultimately we became a team of ownership that owns the brand. So we found the right people, we got investors, ran a process to acquire it from the Stewart family, and we acquired it from scratch. We had to rebuild this brand from scratch. The history was never going to be touched. That was always there, but we're not building a museum. We're building a go-forward plan. So we've got the excellent history and narrative to build off of, but then the pressure's on us to be creative and adopt to newer mechanisms, different demographics, social media, AI, tech, different way boxing works today. Whole complete change, but the brand still carries massive weight. So in some ways that's very makes things easier, but I think in most ways, as John would agree, it makes it harder because the expectations on this brand is unlike any other.
John, I have a question for you. What did KRONK mean to Detroit previously and today?
I think I touched a little on that earlier. I mean, what it meant to the city in my day was, we were really the only team, if you will, that was producing champions for quite some time. I mean, we had, the Tigers in 1984, but if you rewind and you go back to when the amateur team throughout the 70s was producing amateur champions, and then you get into the 80s when you had Hilmer Kinty, Thomas Hearns, Milton McCrory, Dwayne Thomas win their first world championships. You had Stevie McCrory bring a gold medal home in the 84 Olympics, along with Frank Tate, even people like Mark Breland, who came in, Pernell Whitaker to train here, that won Olympic gold. It was really KRONK that was driving the championship spirit of our city. And, there was an old saying, back when Tommy Hearns was going to fight in Vegas, last one to leave, turn the lights out. Because the whole city literally would go to Vegas to support Tommy when he fought. And, when Tommy, just using him as an example, but when Tommy won, the city won. When Tommy lost, the city lost together. And it brought a lot of unity. I think not just in the city, but throughout Metro Detroit as well, stretching out to the suburbs, going downriver. Everywhere you went, KRONK was really, it was that hot thing back in the day. And as far as what it means to the future, like Paul said, it's a great honor to be back, and it's exciting to be back. But there's a lot of pressure, Yeah, sure, people say, oh, you guys got KRONK, it's easy. Well, you know what? Number one, we paid for it. Number two, we may have started on second base, but you know what? Starting on second base comes a whole lot of pressure because you're expected to constantly get in that end zone time after time with the expectations that are set by so many. And so again, I welcome the challenge. I sit a lot more on the boxing side. Paul sits a lot more on a lot of the business initiatives and driving the brand forward, as he had touched on. But I just want to be clear. Paul and I talk about this a lot. There will never be another Emmanuel Stewart. There will never be another original KRONK gym. That was a very special time in place, not just in this city, but in the sport and in the world in general. And so it's great to, again, always have the history and the legacy there. But, you've got to be very realistic with working with what you have today. Boxing is in a very, I would say, unique position, as before it was the dominant combat sport, but now you've got things like mixed martial arts, the UFC, you've got things like jiu-jitsu, so there's a lot more competition out there, but we embrace that, and we're ready for whatever comes our way.
And guys, let's talk about what makes KRONK so special. What makes KRONK different from other boxing gyms across the country? We see those, red and gold shorts. We see, KRONK, it means something when you have it on your chest, like Paul said. So what does it mean when a fighter wears it? What does it mean for the team? And not only, we've talked a lot about what it means to the city, but how does it differentiate itself from other gyms across the country?
We'll do this. Paul and I, we usually will do the 1-2 punch. So I'll set up the jab for Paul's right hand on this one. So when you go back to what Emmanuel Stewart did, was you had some great gyms throughout the history of this sport. People talk about Fifth Street in Miami, where Ali trained. You've got Gleason's in New York. Of course, you've got Freddie Roach's gym out in LA. There's just so many great gyms throughout the country that have produced great talent. But Emmanuel Stewart was the first one that created a boxing team. And he also implemented things like fashion. Emmanuel was the first boxing gym and boxing team to come out with a merch line. And if you look at a lot of the old pictures of Emmanuel and the fighters, they were dressed, for the time, for making fashion statements. Like you talk about the gold trunks, but it's how Emmanuel brought that gold to life. And again, it created its own merch line where fans were now starting to wear KRONK merchandise around the world. And Emmanuel also took the same concept, and I'll turn it over to Paul on this, is that he had a team of people with him. Make no mistake, Emmanuel operated as the owner, the GM, and the head coach of this organization. But he had an amazing support staff. We had people that handled travel, transportation, amateur event coordination, pro fight coordination, training camp coordinators, accountants, lawyers. I mean, I could go down the list. So Emmanuel was truly ahead of his time, where now people talk about, KRONK being known as the fifth franchise, but Emmanuel still built that. And yes, he gets the credit for being the man, the founder, so to speak, but he had a great support system. And I think, Paul, you could touch on how we've kind of adapted a similar approach to today's business model.
Yeah, and just following on from what was said by John, there's levels in every business, every sporting club, from any club dynasty around the world. I can't touch too much on American sports because I might get the names wrong. I know the Giants are really big. I know the Yankees are really big. I know the Dallas Cowboys are really, really big. In my homeland, former homeland, Manchester United are massive. Arsenal, Liverpool. But there's other clubs that are down here that play in the same league as them, but they all want to be with them. Same with the young leagues watching these NFL giants. That's who they want to play for. And that's what, when I was growing up, KRONK for me was the epicenter of world boxing because of everything Emmanuel did that John just spoke about. So this recipe and blueprint, we've got it. The history, we've got all the receipts, they're there. They're up on our walls in the gym. So for us going forward, we know full well who this brand is and what we are. And we know there's a lot of eyes on us, some in good ways and some not so good, because we're at the highest echelon of boxing brands that are around today in the world. Even if we'd not had come back, KRONK would never not be in a conversation with what's the biggest boxing gym or boxing institution that's ever been. Well, because now we are 15, 18 months into the rebirth of this brand, it gives a lot more credibility to what had happened in the past, because of the medium that we have now of displaying that content. And they're reminding people your age, boys, how old are you? You're both under 20, right?
I'm 22.
I'm 14.
You're what?
14.
That's perfect to what I'm about to say. It's all about a new demographic. You weren't even around. KRONK was gone before you were born. And now you've got the two guys on it that are running it today talking about this amazing brand. That's the power of what this is.
We're gonna take a deep dive into the history a little bit later, but let's talk about what are some of the accolades, what are some of the belts that KRONK has held. Let's talk about some of the people that have walked through that gym.
Every major championship that there is to be won in the sport has been won throughout the history of KRONK, going back to Emmanuel Stewart, his first year as the head trainer of the KRONK gym with his brother James Stewart. They remain the only undefeated Golden Gloves team in the history of amateur boxing. They swept the entire Golden Gloves that year, and from that point forward, it was just like a shooting star. It took off, and we've won speaking of boxing titles, like I said, the WBA, the WBC, the IBF, the WBO. Countless champions in each division. Have started out in many cases. What another thing that separates what KRONK did and Emmanuel Stewart did from a lot of other gyms is Emmanuel started these kids out when they were 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old and guided them into Hall of Fame careers. You seldomly see that, especially in other major sports. You go through your high school, you go to college, then you go to the league, and you get traded a few times in the league. But in KRONK, you have so many examples of kids that started out, like I said, at elementary school level, that stayed with Emmanuel and KRONK and won multiple world championships or Olympic gold medals. So just to round out that answer, it goes all the way from every amateur title that there ever has been in USA amateur boxing, world championships in the amateur boxing, to all the big belts. And in addition to having a lot of homegrown grassroots talent that was cultivated right here on these city streets, it also attracted people from all over the world. So KRONK became a global brand also in its heyday, where fighters from all over the world. I'll give you one small example before I turn it over. Thomas Hearns won the WBC light heavyweight championship downtown at one of the old arenas that is no longer there, but he defeated a gentleman, Dennis Andres, who was from not too far from where Paul was from. And then after Dennis lost the title, he then joined KRONK, and then he went on to regain his world championship not once but 2 more times. So there's cases like that where people were beaten by KRONK fighters, and they came and they joined the team that beat them, and they went on to regain their glory.
Look at that.
What does this door has led many to pain and fame mean?
Just what it says. The new door hasn't been baptized yet. Just being very honest. But what it means to me is just what it says. So many of us that came through that door, those experiences led a lot of people to fame. But a lot of people that came through that gym, carried a lot of pain with them too. And sometimes with fame does come pain. And if you've ever experienced fame, then you know what I mean.
Yeah. Paul, same question.
It was perfectly placed on the original gym door, and as John said, I knew what that door was growing up. I always dreamed of going inside it. It was motivating. I heard what it was like when you opened the door and you felt that heat, and it was perfectly positioned on the most perfect location and gym for it. You're not going to have that on a ballerina class, right? So you're going into a boxing gym, but you're going into a very different type of boxing gym. And as John said, that doesn't repeat itself. There was one of our other friends always spoke about, lightning in a bottle. That's what that period of that time was with KRONK. And I suppose every great team has that period. The Bulls winning 6 NBAs with Jordan. I don't know how they're doing now, but I remember that because it was always streamed in the UK. So KRONK was that, and it was epitomised by pain and fame that fit that environment, that time. Now it's on our doors, and I love what John said because he's completely right, and we're deadly serious with it. I've observed this sport for so long. I understand the differences between KRONK and other gyms, and there's things that we're seeing already, and it's like, let's just get this moving. To put in context, guys, we've got 13 amateurs signed. They've not fought yet. We don't know who's good, who's not, who's got capability. Maybe the ones that we don't think have got the capability go shine. And what I'm saying is, like at any work organization, a gym, any soccer team, it's all the same. It finds its rhythm. And you'll soon see, who's the top dog in that gym? That competitiveness, it's not really started. So when John said it's not been baptized, it's nowhere remotely close to what that gym was in terms of that type of ferocity. And I hear stories of the guys that were in the old gym. Even the other night when I was at our gym for a couple of hours just watching stuff. And it's like, that would never happen at the old gym. That would never happen at the old gym. And they should be going harder. And I'm like, hey, I get you, but speak to the trainer. I'm just there to observe. I'm not going to give advice on what it should or shouldn't be. But I know what it should be. And I can say it in this forum. You go in there, you prove who you are, and you leave nothing behind. That's how you find out what pain and fame means. And that's where we're going to take this. But like anything, steady steps. Let the amateurs start fighting. Let's get a few more pros in the stable that bring a whole different mindset to the gym, that's got their eyes on the partner. Not to make him look bad and not to take his spot as the world champion, but he wants to be the king of that gym. We've not got to this dynamic yet, but when it does, yet again for the second time, well, maybe third or fourth time in gym doors that we've had with KRONK, but this gym door will represent pain and fame.
I love it. Let's talk about, you guys are only still in your first 2 years of this KRONK 2.0. So things are traveling in the right direction. It sounds like you guys, really want to get back to that lightning in a bottle that you guys use that expression. So is KRONK something we're trying to modernize? Is it something we're trying to preserve? And how do you even do that? How do we, I know we said Emmanuel can never be replaced, but how do we get KRONK back to, tier one?
Let's do the 1-2 punch again, Paul. Let's, I'll say this with where I come in on the boxing side is making sure that we stay as true and authentic to our roots as possible. Look, I'm just one of thousands of people that came through literally the KRONK organization in one way, shape, or form. So, I always make that clear up front. But I'm here now, and well, I should say I'm back. And one of the first things that was very important for me to do was to try to reunite so many people from different generations of KRONK's past, even some of the generations where I wasn't around. I was out traveling with boxing, moved on to the promotional side of the business, but was to try to reunite the right people with the right mindset that I knew we could count on to build this back into the present model of what it is. Because to the point, no, we will never have another Emmanuel Stewart. So, but what can we have? A lot of people that learned under Emmanuel Stewart, that came from that original KRONK cloth, that are there now passing down those same teaching methods, if you will. Honoring the KRONK traditions, if you will. And like Paul said, some of them sometimes, I'm sure it's frustrating for me, it's frustrating for some of them to see things that, well, that didn't happen back in our day, or it would have been done this way. And a lot of that I do agree with, but there's times where I actually have to talk with some of the guys and say, I understand, trust me, I was there with you, but this is how we have to do it now based on where we're at in the modern era of sport and boxing. Listen, boxing doesn't change, okay? The players come and go, but the game stays the same. At the end of the day, you can have the Zone, or we had HBO, we had Showtime, or you've got, whatever it is today streaming on a different platform. But at the end of the day, as Paul has learned, the people in this business and the players involved in this business is a cast of characters like you've never met in your life. It's the wild west of sports. So to kind of turn it back over to Paul on the note that, it was important for me to bring back as many people where KRONK can stay rooted in its legacy, and we never lose touch with that. It's like coming back to Detroit, you bring back original KRONK guys, and it doesn't mean that that we're changing and we're trying to change what this is about, but we're developing the brand so we don't see it go away, and the city doesn't lose it again, because it's the last thing we want to happen, right, Paul?
Absolutely, and that's what was needed. So if you kind of close what John just said, that's what I look at the first iteration of KRONK. There's no going back. There's no discussions. No one can prove me wrong. There's no going back. It's done. It's closed. But what's left is all of the history, the ethics, the integrity, how the team presents itself, taking the high road, how we roll, how we're perceived by others. All of those elements, if I figuratively, I've pulled all of that out of the brilliance of the original chapter, and now we're sprinkling it and massaging it into the modern day of technology, of business, of scale, of absolutely AI, and fitting all that in back into a crazy world that hasn't changed. But the things around that world have changed greatly. The way fan engagement is, the way the Saudis and the Middle East region has come in, the way Zuffa Boxing have just come in, the acquisitions that are happening, the way media is consumed and portrayed. It's gone bigger and wider, much more an entertainment level scale as well, with the platforms to get things from A to Z in a split second. No telegrams or facsimiles. So the sport hasn't changed, but everything around it has. So we're not just coming back with an old looking gym and doing the same thing, because you're not going to repeat that. We said that real clear at the start. But what we're doing is taking those core elements, those pillars of KRONK, and applying them to modern day practices. And that's where we talk about building a sports franchise. We're not just a boxing gym. We're not just a licensing brand. We're not just a merchandising brand. We are a sports franchise, no different to any of the others around the world, especially the 4 in Detroit that are already so wonderfully established. We do all of the same things, except we have fighters in the ring. We don't have football players on a field. We're not bouncing on a court or skating on ice. But they do all the other things that we are doing to supplement our business. So we're bringing it back differently in that perspective, because it was always a boxing brand, which is what we bought. But in this modern day, with the brand that I always say speaks wherever you go, someone says something, there is so many ways to carve that up, be very smart about how we apply our time, because we've not got, 15 pros all at top 10. We've got to go and leverage the brand. Not yet. We've got to go and leverage the brand to support that. And that's another thing when you ask John about the boxing gyms, and respectfully, Gleason's, Miami 5th Street, Wildcard Gym, tremendous establishments. They could never be a sports franchise. They just can't. So that's why KRONK is so unique. I was with somebody, a friend of mine, for lunch yesterday, and he asked me the question, who can you compare KRONK to? And it's a question that I have to answer, but I'm saying it respectfully. And I know, you two fine young men don't know me too well, so I'm not one of these people with a big head. But when I say there is nothing like this brand in the world of boxing, in its history or its present, that's what KRONK is. There's nothing to go against. It stands alone in my book. So going back to what John said, and I actually understood the second base analogy, I'm getting there. So we are on second base. I've got some friends that are building IT companies with no name, no brand, and they always say that, hey, you've got a cheat code. Well, I say similar to them, but maybe with a few cuss words that John is more polite than me to say on air. But yeah, you try doing it then. It's not so easy when you've got something that existed, especially when it's so successful. So it does give you a lot of help having a known brand, because when we're active on LinkedIn doing posts and what have you, a lot of people reach out because you're active. Hey, I want to work with you guys, because they know the brand. If we're just starting Paul and John's boxing club, we're not getting big organizations to reach out, because, well, who the hell are these guys? But KRONK's now around. Hey, I want my name on your wall. What are you doing for the community? How can I sponsor your fighters? Do you want to do a collaboration? That's all real things that have happened in a very short amount of time. So, so we're bringing it back with all the same principles, but just adapting to modern day technology and business.
When we did our calls earlier, one thing we were discussing is you can't buy this reputation. I mean, this is something that strictly has to be built, and you guys are carrying that out, what has been built already. But Paul, you discussed new technology within the business side, and that's obviously the main aspect of getting a name out there. But let's talk about the boxing side. We're seeing sports science, explode. Kickers are kicking the ball further. Golfers are driving it further. Pitchers are pitching faster. Football players are hitting harder. I mean, how are you guys using this technology within the ring, aside from the business, but within the ring to see results?
Well, listen, you can compare statistics in every other sport, and I think it's much easier to apply a lot of what you just said to any other major sport, literally. But I would challenge anyone to go back. Now, I'm talking modern era. Of course, you could go back and God bless the great John L. Sullivan, and no, he wouldn't be able to compete against Tyson Fury, with all due respect. But you can't tell me that Sugar Ray Robinson or Henry Armstrong couldn't compete today with whether it be a Floyd Mayweather or whoever, some of the other champions that have come across just in this last decade of the highest, most elite fighters in the game. So you can implement things like strength and conditioning, recovery techniques. I think a lot of that is very important. But if you look at traditionally what fighters did, I say it a lot of times. We didn't know exactly what we were doing, but we knew it worked. Like I remember in the fitness industry several years back, they came up with this new phrase. Oh, we're going to do fasted cardio. Well, what's that mean? You wake up in the morning, you don't eat breakfast, and you go run. Well, I got news flash. You guys are selling it as a fitness trend. We've been doing it since the 1920s. It's so, like you get out and you see these guys with the sledgehammers hitting the big tires in the fitness gyms. Well, you know what? Go down and look at pictures and you'll see fighters out chopping trees. Muhammad Ali won. So much I think can benefit on the recovery side. I think that strength and conditioning has modernized to a point where if done effectively with an S&C coach that understands their position and their role and how to work with the trainer to maximize the fighter's performance based on what the trainer's trying to get out of the fighter, then it's a good thing. But I've seen so much trash when like I'll see somebody walking backwards on a treadmill with a pair of gloves hitting mitts and there's just so much nonsense that people come up with that again ties into what Paul was speaking on. It's all about social media, it's about likes, it's about engagement, it's about trying to do something different that hasn't been done before. If you go back to the ring and you put Sugar Ray Robinson in the ring against any champion today in a weight class close to what he's fought in, and you know what? Respectfully, I'd probably still put my money on Sugar Ray Robinson.
Where do you see boxing today as the UFC grows?
UFC's hurt the sport, and I'll speak from a business. Okay, so back when my generation, we were kids, you went to the boxing gym. If you had a taste for combat sports, it wasn't called combat sports back then, but for lack of better term, if you were a little aggressive, you had a little violent streak in you, or you were getting in trouble, they sent you to the boxing gym, and that's where you went. There were some good solid karate dojos where you could go to get the contact, but boxing was the only full contact sport where it came down to you. There's no handing the ball off to the running back, or there's no break between plays. Boxing was it. And on the business side, I saw it too, because you were able to sell out arenas with fights on a regular basis. Now kids have options, and parents are a lot more conscious of the safety aspects, which is something Paul and I take very seriously. We've implemented a lot of checks and balances in the gym, but to stay on point is that you've got now parents that will take their kids to jiu-jitsu where there's no contact, and not to take anything away from jiu-jitsu, but when you can do this, you can't do that in boxing. Okay, so you're losing kids to safer contact engagement sports like jiu-jitsu. MMA, you're losing a lot of guys that used to go into boxing are now going into MMA. And I think a large part of that has to do with credit to Dana White and what he's done with the UFC, because he's created a brand and nobody's been able to come close to matching that. So you get guys that, back in the day could have maybe been a top 20 contender or a good solid B-side opponent that you would see time and time again in the business side and the sport tying in with it, that are now somewhere off fighting in an MMA type of event. So it's definitely impacted the sport and the business.
Paul, same question.
So it's without a doubt, it's I guess boxing needed a rival at some point because it sharpens tools, it sharpens ideas, and I actually watched an interview with Dana White the other day, and I want to get this right, but he said something along the lines of everything UFC started because of everything he loved about boxing, and everything he hated about boxing, he made UFC not be like that. So boxing was his prime example of prize fighting, but we're going to do it in this confined manner, which has clearly got some advantages because he's an extremely successful man. Where I don't think it's going to work for him, but I could well be wrong, and if I am, so be it. He started out in boxing now with the same approach of UFC, and he's brought in a new belt, the Zuffa belt. I'm sorry. If I'm a fighter, there's one belt I want, and everything else after that, second, third, and fourth. I want the WBC green belt. Then I'm a world champion. How is a fighter going to be recognised that is the Zuffa champion of the world? Sound right. So fair play. A man with tremendous resources, a trail of success in his coming to a sport that is the Wild West, which is part of the drug for it that I've become even more in love with, despite the frustration. But it's different, and a lot of the promoters now, they're very much, I think it's made boxing tighter, core boxing, and Zuffa's now out on this little ledge doing what it's doing, and it's going to cherry pick some fighters, and it's going to create a dynamic. But what I do like about that, somebody has to win. So there's a lot of smart people in boxing, and now we're in this ecosystem again with different mindset and different approaches. It represents a lot of opportunity. That's how we see it. So there's a lot of madness going on, but for us, we can just watch this madness happen, and we can do our own thing, and we can strike when we know we can strike.
And let's talk about boxing as a whole. Let's step outside of KRONK for just a second here. You guys have both referred to the current state of boxing as the Wild West. There's the WBC. You named a few notable belts. Where is boxing today? There's delays between fights. There's no singular industry or singular business like there is the NFL, MLB. Where is boxing today, and is that a good thing?
Well, there's been one thing that my friend Mike Tyson would tell you right now, is that in order to drive this sport, you have to have a very special and dynamic heavyweight champion that's from America. And I mean no disrespect to any of the great fighters and fans from around the world, but you get a dynamic American heavyweight champion that captures the imagination and the attention of random people walking down the street. That's what boxing, I think, one of the things that it needs. There's been different eras in boxing that are defined by what? Who is the heavyweight champion? You're Jack Dempsey, you're Joe Louis, you're Muhammad Ali. Then you had a dark period after where Larry Holmes didn't necessarily get the credit and respect that he deserved for being a great champion. But then who stepped in? The Four Kings. Thomas Hearns, Roberto Duran, Marvin Hagler, Sugar Ray Leonard, and a whole bunch of other great fighters in different weight classes surrounding them. But they kind of carried the torch because they had all these big mega fights that were on. And then came the Mike Tyson era, and so again, each generation of boxing is usually judged and I think most notably, referred to as who was the heavyweight champion or the standout faces at that time. And tying into what I think, Paul was speaking about from where I sit, having been a part of this business for so many years and seeing it work internally behind closed doors, is people have to be willing to work together. Dana started the UFC, like Paul said, and he created this box, and everything stays within there. Boxing's all over the place. So if anyone there's several people have come along and tried to change the game and organize the game and get control of it and put it in that box over the years, but no one has been successful. And people have lost hundreds of millions of dollars, and that's no exaggeration. and trying to reinvent this wheel. This wheel's been rolling for a long time. Dana White probably has the best chance at doing it because of the people that he is surrounded by, but he's got a lot of work ahead of him. And I think, again, one of the biggest things that could help boxing is everybody stop acting like, well, you know, I've got my toys and I'm not going to let anybody play with them. You have to work together for the betterment of the sport. The more boxing, the better the sport is. The more competition, the more the fans win. You know, I say, and I'll leave it at this, I think for as much great as Floyd Mayweather did for the sport, I think, unfortunately, a lot of people took away the wrong lesson from what he did, okay? They forget the fact of how hard he trained, that he never stopped grinding. He never stopped working hard, even when the millions and hundreds of millions of dollars started to come in for him. He still trained as hard as he did when he had his pro debut. And so now everybody looks at the undefeated record, they want the YouTube or the Instagram viral clip, you know, they want to post stupid videos on TikTok. You know, you've got to get back to the roots of what has always historically made this a great sport, and that is the best fight the best, and rival promoters in the business have to work together.
So I'll cover it from more of a broader angle in terms of, yeah, boxing was renowned to not have the big fights come together. I'll go back to two of the biggest promoters in the world, Frank Warren, Queensberry Promotions, Eddie Hearn Matchroom. Two fantastically successful stables, but they never matched each other's stable. So the fans are left wondering, what if he fought him? What a fight. Two guys in the same country where Frank used to work with Eddie's dad, no relationship. You know what happened? Turkey Al Sheikh came around. Riyadh season, the Saudi money, millions and millions upon millions of dollars came into that sport because he wanted to make boxing, well, great again. Can't believe I just said that. But yeah, Bagger or Maga, whatever. Anyway. But yeah, he wanted to make boxing something special again by getting the best fighters to fight each other at their peak. Not like Pacquiao Mayweather won 5 years late and forget what they're doing in September. It's farcical. Anyway, he comes in, he gets Frank Warren and Eddie Hearn to talk. All of a sudden, they become best friends because money starts coming in. They're talking. They're putting on great fights. They did a Matchroom and a Queensberry 5 versus 5, and the fans started to see lots of great events. Fast forward 2 years, well, that money train dried up, completely dried up. And Turkey now he's looked at Eddie, he's looked at Frank, didn't want to go to bed with them. He chose Dana White because he wants to make money out of this sport. Dana's done it in UFC, TKO are involved with Zuffa, and now they've come together to build this framework around boxers, which will hurt small hall shows, promoters and fighters and little stadiums, and they are now on the pull and the cull from fighters in every stable that may have been discarded or not getting action to come and sign for us. So they have got big intentions in this sport, and it'll be very interesting to see how it plays out. And in fact, similarly to what John said, it'll be very interesting for me to watch what fighters make that move. Because when John mentioned about Floyd Mayweather, it completely made sense to me. Because Floyd never gets the flowers for, I think, sometimes the fighter he was, and that guy's work ethic. You know, the testament that he can still fight at 49 in September. I don't agree with the fight, but he's going to be fit enough because he's never been out of the gym. But people, other fighters, did things that changed the sport, I mean, considerably since his time. So why I'm saying that is, Zuffa is now at a point where it can really change the grassroots and the dynamic of this sport. So if I'm a fighter and I'm happy fighting at KRONK and John's my advisor, and Zuffa come to me to sign for them, and they're now going to fight for a Zuffa belt, I have to question that person's character because they're not doing what's right for boxing.
Guys, we're coming up on 2 years now, 20 months today. This April will be 21. What's going to make it in 5 years from now when we look back? We're going to say we did it. Is it a certain amount of medals? Is it a certain amount of belts? Is it you got to have so and so in the gym? Is it what is it going to make us say we did it in 5 years?
That's a really good question.
Well, I've got a couple answers to that on the boxing side. I'm a boxing guy, and so I would definitely like for us to have our first world champion, if not more than one. That's one. That's one goal I would like to accomplish. I think it's very realistic. But then I don't think it's for me if we made it, we did it. It's okay. Now what's next? It's what's the next? Where are we going next? What are we doing next? What are we going to achieve next? What are we going to build next? How do we take the brand to another level? And that means not just on the boxing side, but the business side. So for me, there's no answer to that. It's let's just keep going and keep going and keep building. And as Paul said earlier, we have to, of course, always know our space and I think have realistic goals on the boxing side. But I think with where we're going and on the business side, there's endless opportunity, Paul.
Yeah, and similar for me, guys. I'm never one for putting, pressure, deadlines. Hey, John, I need 3 world champions in 5 years. Or pressuring myself, we've got to have X million revenue in this. It's not about that. For me, it's all about building the horizontal, the foundation, the platform, and then carefully slide into your verticals. Slowly but surely, as we've eased into the gym, slowly but surely and successfully as we've eased into merchandise. Same with licensing. We've not gone into franchising the gym yet. We've not gone into documentary world. There is so many things to do. So I look at the next 5 years as a continuation, but hopefully 2x of business each year, 5x of business per year of all the things that we're doing, growing that horizontal and just solidifying everything. A pipeline of fighters, people waiting to join us when we've got capacity, either physical capacity or training capacity. I've been fortunate to have a few moments in my career that have been, wow, we did it. I was going work next morning 7:30. I'm not bothered. Happy, done, move on. What's next? So for me, this isn't 3 years, 5 years. This is about providing scale and longevity for a brand that will never ever go away again on our watch. That's our internal mission and that's our drive and brief. And it's just taking it as far as we can go, being the chameleon and mold into different ways of businesses and sectors and personnel that we meet, technology, and make sure this always fits and it's holding the flag for others to follow versus now when we've had to really start, they're there. We got to go chase everybody. Now we're kind of getting a bit more up there, but I want us to be leading the charge. So that's just a developmental stage of any business. So that's how I class that answer.
I absolutely love that. And Tom Brady said it. I think, he said a very similar metaphor. It was, they always asked him, what's your favorite ring? He always said the next one. So I think that kind of perfectly sums up what you guys are saying. Gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for coming on the Your Detroit Now show. We've had a great time. We've learned a lot. I really appreciate it. Where can they get a hold of you guys? If anyone wants to reach out or learn more, where can we see more of you guys?
Well, you can hit us up on our website, KRONK.com. We have our Instagram page, Real KRONK Gym. We're Facebook, we're KRONK. You know our names. You can find us on Instagram. And there's also a generic email address where we get lots of inquiries, info@kronk.com. So you can hit us up we're findable, let's just put it that way.
And I think to touch base on, getting a hold of us, listen, Detroit, has an enormous amount of talent. And I'm just not talking about boxing, so just like we're true to bringing back a lot of the original KRONK guys, in the gym as far as training staff, gym staff, if there's anybody out there that wants to send in a resume or has a concept or an idea, shoot that email over. I believe in Detroit. I love to see Detroit making a comeback, and anything that we can do to give back to Detroiters as well. We're here for you. Our doors are always open, and I'm a firm believer in supporting the city that supports us.
That's outstanding. Well, gentlemen, thank you again for joining the show. It's greatly appreciated.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Paul. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please subscribe. Come watch our next video. And this is Your Detroit Now.